When we talk about IP tools, we usually think of patents and copyrights and trademarks, right? Actually, did you know the most important IP tool is a contract? When your contracts are properly aligned with your business objectives, they can be very powerful. But when they're not, you could be headed for trouble. Welcome to IPY. There are 3 IP issues that affect all businesses, and they can be summarized in what I call the IP triad. The ownership of IP, the right to use IP, which we also call freedom to operate or FTO, and the protection of IP. And we could talk all day long about protecting IP, but if you don't actually own it, there's no point. And that's why it's at the top of the IP triad. IP ownership seems like a no-brainer, but it's not, because there's traps for the unwary. Imagine that you subcontract part of your project to a vendor, say to build a user interface or an API. And maybe that vendor's work is totally routine, or maybe they have a cool idea that integrates nicely into your project. But either way, you like to keep things simple. So you just pay the vendor's invoice and there's no contract. It's all good, right? I mean, you own the work product because it was built to your specifications and you paid for it, right? Actually, it doesn't work like that at all. As a general rule, the legal owner of IP is the one who created it. It's your vendor that owns that API, not you. And that's true whether we're talking about vendors or employees or contracts or even other founders. Without a contract saying that you own the IP, you don't. It's that simple. Contracts are not only an unexpected IP tool, but a really important one. Unless you own your IP on paper, you probably don't own it at all. And if you don't own your IP, your business is living on borrowed time. Remember, your IP is the ideas, information, and data that differentiate your business from all the others. And it's not only your best innovative ideas, but it's all your computer code, your AI models, your know-how, and your proprietary data. But why is it so important to own the IP that you need for your business? There's 2 reasons. Firstly, owning your IP helps you use it however you want, without seeking someone else's permission or paying royalties or other fees. And secondly, owning your IP is one of the most important factors when it comes to your valuation in the eyes of investors and potential buyers. Does that mean you need to own all of the IP that you use or generate? Not necessarily. Imagine, for example, that you build custom solutions for customers, and the core elements of that solution you may need to own to ensure that you can continue to develop your core business. But other pieces, like integrations into their computer systems, may be unique to them and not really useful for you to keep anyway. Other components you may not build at all, but instead license them from other sources like open source. So the question is, what IP do you need to own? Like all your other IP decision points, it's your IP strategy roadmap that will help you decide which IP is important for your business to own. And if you haven't seen it, check out my IPY video on IP strategy roadmaps. So if you've just been signing contracts without giving it much thought, or believe that downloading templates from the internet was good enough, think again. When it comes to IP, ownership is a huge question. And when it comes to ownership, your contracts have to be aligned with your business strategy. Contracts can also define other rules around IP, such as who may use IP, for what purpose, how long they can use it, and so on. Confidentiality agreements and NDAs are also important IP contracts, and IP license agreements are contracts as well. In fact, a good customer or vendor contract may have all of these things in one document. When it comes to your employees and contractors, you need a contract saying that you own the IP that they create in their work. And it's a good idea as well to have provisions that forbid them from using the IP or confidential information of their former employers. And that's to ensure that your business really owns what they create for you. One of the first things that potential investors and buyers want to know is, do you actually own the IP that you use in your business? And that means 2 things. First, you can't put this off. You got to get it right now. Second is, when you go to make your pitch, be ready to prove that you own the IP that you say you own. And doing that also shows that you're sophisticated and in control. Unfortunately, IP law doesn't have any inherent protection for data, and copyright doesn't protect data very well either. That means it's your contracts, along with physical controls like encryption, that provide your main data protections. Contracts that grant access to data should also restrict use only to authorized purposes, and they should require that the data be protected confidentially. And where applicable, the contract may also need to say who owns any derived data or other byproducts of the data use. Besides your primary data, your contracts may also need to address the ownership and use of data such as training sets or hyperparameters or other valuable data that you possess or create. IP ownership may not have seemed intuitive at first, but now that you know the basics, it's not complicated anymore. Success requires knowing which IP you need to own and the right contracts in place to make it happen. Don't forget to check out the IPY webpage for more. In the next video, I'm going to share some tips and secrets on how to work with IP professionals.